Before I begin, I'd like to make it absolutely clear, not all forms of inequality are equal. Clearly, there are some forms of inequality whose manifestations and reasons and symptoms are far more damaging than other forms of inequality. Racial inequality, for instance, is one of those. But let's just have a very quick look at what we mean by systematic inequality for neurodiverse people. Now, this is very important. What I don't mean is how many neurodiverse people are in the top jobs. How many neurodiverse politicians do we have? That's not the inequality itself. That's not the systemic inequality. That's the manifestation of the inequality. That's the proof of the inequality. It's not what the inequality is, it's the proof of the inequality. The inequality comes out in things that I've already talked about. For instance, things like dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, dysphasia, dysnomia. This language that we have, inequality is factored into the language. Of course it is. But more than that, actually, there's something deeper going on, something far more deep-rooted that causes the inequalities that people with dyslexia have. We often talk, for instance, of saying, well, once you're in the classroom, you should make accommodations, you could make adjustments, you can make things friendlier in the classroom. Yeah, but that's the surface. It goes far deeper than that. Dyslexia is a neurological condition. It's about the way the brain is shaped. This is very important because the way the brain is shaped, the neurology of dyslexia, means that people with dyslexia process information differently. We have effectively a different form of thinking. Now, the anthropologist Peter Winch and the philosopher Richard Bernstein each talked about different forms of rationality. The idea that the form of rationality that we have given to us through the Enlightenment is the only form of rationality available, the only form of rationality that could possibly be available, is a nonsense. This is actually only about 300 years old. And yet, the entire system of government, the entire system of industry, the entire system of education comes from this form of rationality. It comes from this appropriation of rationality. But where we accept from anthropologists and philosophers that there are more than one form of rationality, then suddenly we start to see what the inequality means. People with neurodiversity have different forms of rationality from those who think normally in that kind of parlance. And so, yes, it's all very well making accommodations in school, but the entire structure of society, the entire structure of what it is to think of somebody as being right or wrong, rational, right thinking, this goes to the heart of the inequality in the neurodiverse world. Those of us who think, for instance, have a different view of time. People with dyslexia often have a polychronic or even a diachronic view of time, as the culturalist Franz Trompenaars called it. Whereas the society that's been created by the West, the Enlightenment West, has a very linear, very sequential view of time. Those of us who do not think like that are naturally looked upon as being late or being disorganized in terms of time. But we're not. We're just differently organized. And yet, as soon as people start judging what we do as negative, as deficit, then instead of judging us against different standards, they judge us against one standard and hold that standard up as absolute. But if you can't demonstrate the absolute nature of the standards of rationality and timekeeping and truth and thought that the Western society is currently built on, then why not start exploring different ways of including everyone? The kind of inequality that we're dealing with is systemic and it's deep-rooted. It goes to the heart of how we process information and how those who process information slightly differently from the norm are looked upon as deficient, as irrational, as bad timekeepers, as disrespectful. The number of times people have said, oh, you didn't keep time in the way that I wanted you to keep time. You don't respect me. And that's furthest from the truth it could be. I respect and I love those people around me. And when they say that I don't respect them because, for instance, my version of timekeeping, I don't not always manage to keep time in the way that others want me to, because That sometimes goes wrong. They say, I don't respect them. That hurts. It cuts to the very core, not of what I do, but of who I am. And if we can accept, as I think we should accept, that logic is polyvalent, there are different forms of logic, there are different forms of rationality, there are different ways of looking at time, then we take what the philosopher Cornel West called regimes of truth. And we say these regimes have been imposed upon us. And if we don't fit them, instead of looking at the regimes, we are judged negatively. And I think that as long as we continue to judge people negatively for processing information in their brains differently, we will always have an unequal society, no matter how many people with neurodiversity are in the top jobs or parliament.